All right, so you'll notice I put up kind of that next homework assignment. A little bit less time to work on that. So we're kind of having two that are kind of running concurrently right now. I would start working on that early as we kind of cover material. The first few questions we might get there today, but if not, kind of starting Friday, we'll start covering material that you can kind of chip away at that homework. We'll kind of have everything we talk about. Like I said, maybe a little bit today, then on Friday as well as next week. That'll be kind of what the homework covers. So after next week, you should have everything you need to kind of complete it. But I just want to get up there early so as we work through the material and people want to, you can kind of chip away at it. Questions for me before we kind of get going here today? I'll also put up, I think I told you that those practice problems. I'll get the next set up as well, which will kind of look a little bit foreign because we haven't necessarily covered all the material yet. But as we cover the material the next week and a half, 2 weeks, all those practice problems should make a little bit more sense as well. So you'll see that kind of up there. The ones that we have one over is the one that's practice problems 3. Okay. And that's under the files tab and practice problems. All right. So right now there's kind of just the practice problems 3 up there. All right, so we left off last class. Oops. Thinking about monopolies, right? So I think, one way to think about this is anytime we have a monopolized market, we know the price is always going to be higher, and we know the quantity is always going to be lower. Right? We can also identify what were the changes in surplus. Right? So total surplus when the market is in equilibrium, we can kind of think about as really just the area in between my supply and my demand curve. Right? Now I could break this up. I was thinking about like the equilibrium price. This triangle up here represents what? What's always on top? Not a good way to think of it. What's always on top is consumer surplus, the difference between the price and the demand curve. And then this area of total surplus would represent producer surplus. Right? So you add those together, we get total surplus. So once we have a monopoly, right, we know that we're getting lower production. So all that surplus that we lose out on from no longer providing this higher quantity in the market, no longer having that perfect competitive quantity, that's all surplus that we lose. Kind of definition of deadweight loss is the amount of total surplus that's lost, right? Usually we're looking at it as a result of government actions. Now we're looking at it as a result of monopoly behavior. So monopoly behavior kind of causes this deadweight loss of society. It also kind of converts some of what used to be consumer surplus into producer surplus. And kind of here, right? Producer surplus has gone up, but consumer surplus has become a smaller triangle. So we can compute these values if we had like a grid line, and we're able to kind of identify exactly where we're at on this demand curve, marginal revenue curve, et cetera. So we'll kind of take a look at how we would do that here. Okay. So we'll start out kind of thinking about if this market, and I don't need this one, but we want to be able to go back and solve. If this was a perfectly competitive market, what should the equilibrium quantity and price we see in that market be? So if I'm in a perfectly competitive market, I know that equilibrium quantity and price should be wherever supply intersects demand. Now I don't have a supply curve up here, but what would represent supply in this graph? Yeah, someone said it. So remember, demand always represents marginal benefit. Supply reflects marginal cost. Well, supply usually reflects the marginal cost of every company, but here we've got one company. So their marginal cost curve is essentially the supply curve. They're only going to provide these first 5 units if the price is 10 or higher. Then they'll provide the next, up to 10 units when the price is 15 or higher, so on and so forth. So that marginal cost curve is essentially our supply curve. So the equilibrium price and quantity would be right here. So looks like 22.5 would be the quantity. I'm following this right. And then, yeah. And then 27.5 would be the price. Questions on that? Let me see the next question I've got. I think I might want to do something. Yeah. So I'll actually add some more questions in here. So go on the slides. What would the price quantity combination be if this market was instead monopolized, right? So that was the perfect competitive pricing and quantity. What should be true about the price and quantity if this market was instead monopolized? Price should be higher and the quantity should be lower. But what will that quantity and price be? Well, we identify the profit maximizing quantity where, so kind of think about the optimal quantity for the monopolist is where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, right? So where does marginal revenue and marginal cost? Click right here. So a quantity of 15, which is a lower quantity than before. Now the price is not 20. How do I find the price the monopolist can charge? I go up to the demand curve because I know that at that quantity of 15, people would be willing to pay whatever their marginal benefit is, which is what the demand curve reflects. So I go up that demand curve, looks like 35 would be the price, right? So there, if I'm looking at a monopolist, we get that quantity was 15, price was 30, so price is higher than it was before, quantity is going to be lower. Yeah.
In those instances, will we ever have to calculate the deadweight loss?
Yeah, so that's the next question. In fact, I'll kind of give you an idea and then we see how we're looking at it. So let's say I want to calculate deadweight loss. How would I do? I've got the answer up here, but how would I get that 56.25? Okay. So I'll kind of draw this out. That work through this on the board as opposed to just pointing it. So we've got marginal cost, we've got demand, got marginal revenue. Average total cost looks something like this. So we said before, we identify that equilibrium quantity for the monopolist. Where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Right? Actually, what do I have labeled wrong here? Sorry, I was writing here. Right? Marginal revenue is twice as steep as the rate. So I've got this quantity that the monopolist is going to kind of profit maximize that when marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. And then go up here and determine what that price is, right? That they go charge. Price that the monopolist charges there, MOM. So I know that the perfectly competitive quantity was out here. So I've lost out on all of that surplus. Okay. So what can I do, right, to find what that surplus value is? Well, here, I think that we said the equilibrium quantity of a perfect, if this market was a perfect competition, would be 22.5. The monopolist quantity was 15. We also said they could charge 30. I've got everything I need to get the base of this triangle, but I need one more thing to get the height, right? I need to know where am I at on that marginal revenue and marginal cost curve, like where do those two intersect at, right? So if I look up here, that marginal revenue equal to marginal cost at 20. That'll be the last thing that I need. So now it's a matter of finding the area of a triangle. The height is going to be what? 30 minus 20 times the base, which is 22.5 minus 15, and then multiply it by 1/2 because we're dealing with a triangle. So you could have to find the deadweight loss from something like this. I think having this drawn out where you kind of see the shaded in might make it look a little bit easier. It's kind of always drawing these out kind of like is helpful, or having a nice visual, but that's how you would find the area of deadweight loss. Is it 35? Yes. Sorry. I was trying to do this from memory. It probably is over there. Yeah, 35. Any other questions from this? What if instead I'd ask you to find consumer surplus? So this starts out here at 50. after we see this market be monopolized, what is consumer surplus? So consumer surplus is always the difference between the price that consumers are paying and the demand curve. So here, we'd have consumer surplus. Well, how could I find that? The triangle. What's the height of that triangle? 50 minus 35. What's the base? Goes from 0 to 15. So I guess if I wanted to, I could put 15 minus 0. Probably easier just to put 15 in there. I think I can do that in my head. And then multiply that by 1/2. Okay. I don't know if it's going to calculate. I can't know if I can do this in my head. So sounds about right. 112.5. Okay. What if I wanted producer surplus here? Producer surplus is going to be the area between my supply curve and the price that they're able to receive, right, or charge. So here, this would be the entire area that represents producer surplus. Now this one I've got a little bit more work to find because I've got two shapes essentially within here, right? I've got this triangle and I've got this rectangle, right? So to find the area of that rectangle, 35 minus 20 is the height. The base goes from 15 to 0. It's a rectangle, so I don't have to multiply by 1/2. I would then add to that the area of this triangle. So I've got one more piece of information I need, which is where does that supply curve start? My marginal cost curve start looks like it's at 5. So the height would be 20 minus 5. The base is going from 0 to 15. And then I multiply that by 1/2 because it's a triangle. And 12. So at 15, that's 337.5. Sounds right. Okay. So I've got producer surplus, I've got consumer surplus, and I can also calculate deadweight loss if I've got a monopolized market. Okay. Any questions over anything there before we keep moving? Okay. So, what is going to be kind of the main reason for why we see deadweight loss in monopolies? Right? So they're trying to maximize profits. People boycott monopolies more often. Monopolies sell output at a higher price, and monopolies are usually run by rent-seeking control. So we haven't really kind of talked about what rent-seeking means, but essentially rent-seeking is an economic term for you're trying to maximize your surplus, even if that comes at a cost of other people. So the monopolist in this situation, right, took some of what used to be consumer surplus, turned it into producer surplus. So that's kind of rent-seeking behavior. But if we're really kind of, where does this all start out at? The entire reason, like monopolists aren't trying to necessarily engage in that rent-seeking behavior. They're just looking out for their own interests, which is that they're trying to maximize profits. That's where it all starts. Because they're maximizing profits, they're choosing a quantity that was below the perfectly competitive quantity, right? So kind of selling less output at a higher price, that wasn't like their goal. Their main goal of starting out was they were just trying to maximize profits. As a result of maximizing profits, yes, they engaged in rent-seeking behavior. Yes, they sold a lower output at a higher price. But that's not kind of the reason why the deadweight loss existed. The deadweight loss exists because the original thing that a firm is trying to do on the other side is maximize profits, right? So in order to maximize profits, they're choosing that quantity where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. For the monopolist, that just happens to be at a lower output than what is kind of optimal for society, right? What's optimal for society is where total surplus is maximized. Thank you. Okay. I want to say anything else here. Keep moving here. Yeah.
On the presenter notes, it says that the correct answer is C.
Well, I don't know how that got messed up as I was posting those. I'll repost the skeleton version of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll repost that. That I don't know how that would happen. Sometimes, actually, I think I do know how it happened. I might have had this. If it updates the version of PowerPoint, sometimes with my graphics, they move on the slides. I don't really understand, but it's like different versions for some reason, the images, and because I inserted this kind of box, it might have shifted, but yeah, I'll repost those. Thank you for saying something too, by the way, because I'm sure that is confusing. So I'll put this up here, but I'm going to draw this out and hopefully I think have a better explanation. I mean, this is a good summary slide, but I think seeing it pieced together might make this, will hopefully make this. So I talked last class at the end about this idea of natural monopoly, that sometimes there's only enough demand to support one firm in that industry. As soon as you have two, they would experience negative profits, one of them leaves, you're left with one firm, a monopoly. So what can we do? Because generally the government tries to step in, break up monopolies because they know it's bad for consumers. They know it leads to higher prices, less output, and deadweight loss. The problem is if we have a natural monopoly, we run into some problems. So let's say I've got my demand curve here. And I think to make this easier, did I make marginal cost? Yeah, marginal cost, we'll just keep it as constant. We know that generally it's increasing, but just to simplify this a little bit, we'll kind of keep marginal cost constant. This is like the drug example where every single drug, right? It's the fixed costs are huge, research and development and machinery, but really to just produce more pills, it's just whatever the amount of the drug, and that's always going to be the same price. So there are applications where we would see constant marginal cost. So we've got this constant marginal cost curve. We also know marginal revenue will be twice as steep as our demand curve. And we've got average total costs looking something like this. So if we were to draw this out, like continue to draw this out, right, we know that, sorry, eventually average total cost would hit my marginal cost curve and then begin to increase, but in this situation, we're not going to make it out that far for a natural monopolist. The natural monopolist will be somewhere on kind of that decreasing portion of the average total cost curve. You don't need to necessarily know that, but for the sake of this example, we'll just kind of assume it, right? So we're dealing with this kind of decreasing portion of the average total cost curve. So where is the optimal quantity, right? How do I determine what the profit maximizing quantity is for this monopolist? Yeah, marginal revenues and marginal costs right here. So we'll kind of call this QM, or the quantity the monopolist will choose. The price that they're going to charge will be up on that demand curve. And we can kind of see, okay, where is average total cost at that optimal quantity? So price is above average total cost, just as kind of a reminder. Profits are the difference between price and average total cost, are kind of like our per unit profit times however many units we sell, right? Or times our quantity. So here, my price the monopolist chooses above average total cost, so we're going to have positive profits. The only issue is you can kind of think about what's the deadweight loss that exists. So this is kind of an extreme example, but marginal cost reflects my, or supply reflects my marginal cost, and my marginal cost curve, if I only have one firm, is my supply curve. So where would the perfectly competitive quantity be? Way out here. So what's my deadweight loss? Well, I'm no longer getting the surplus. Remember, total surplus is the area between supply and demand. I'm no longer getting the surplus from any of these units once I have monopolies, because they're no longer providing those units to the market. So I've got a pretty large reduction in total surplus, or a pretty large deadweight loss here. So I'm the government, I look at this and I say, okay, well, look, I want to get us back up to this point. So if I stepped in and told this firm, you have to provide this many of whatever drug this is to the market. Okay? You have to do it. People need this drug. What's the problem going to be? If you force the firm to produce at this quantity, this would be the new price, right? If we're all the way out here, the price people are willing to pay is the point of that line demand curve. So the price becomes a marginal cost. And the point that I'm at in my average total cost curve is now up here. So maybe think about this as, identify this differently. We'll call this regulation. So price of the regulation that the government came in and did, the average total cost as a result of that regulation. Well, if average total cost is above price, what's true about profits? They're negative. So what does this firm do? If the government's gonna come in and regulate, this firm leaves completely. Now what's deadweight loss? All of this, right? So it's like, if the government comes in, tries to fix this problem, they actually cause an even bigger problem, right? Now, if they're smart, what they'll instead do is they'll say, okay, look, we know that we can't force them to get down to this perfectly competitive quantity. Okay? But what we can do is we can look at this and say, okay, how can we minimize, we can't get rid of deadweight loss completely, but how can we minimize deadweight loss? Yeah.
Would you maybe place a price ceiling or a price floor?
So we're definitely, you could use a price ceiling to do this, right? Instead of dictating the quantity, you could set a price ceiling. Okay, think about this perfectly. Or sorry, you would set a, you set a price ceiling, so you can't charge a price above this. Where would I actually want to set that at? Well,
The price to think now.
so think about if I set it right here. Okay, so I set some price ceiling, I could draw the horizontal line, but then I'll have too many lines going on here, so let's just kind of step by step. If I set the price here, well, price is still above average total, so the monopolist is like, okay, it sucks, right? The new quantity is out here, deadweight loss is smaller, but at least we're still earning positive profits, right? Even after this regulation. Well, then the government says, okay, we're gonna impose a price ceiling right here. Okay, yeah, deadweight loss is smaller now, price is still above average total cost, profits are still positive, so the monopolist won't leave. Essentially, what you'll do is get down to this point where that average total cost curve intersects demand. And you know, at that price, so we'll kind of call this price reg, I guess 2, right? Or kind of what the actual regulation price should be. At this price, what's the value of average total cost? It's exactly the same. So I know at this point, the monopolists will be indifferent. They're earning zero economic profits. They're indifferent from staying in or leaving, right? So in practice, probably don't go right exactly at that point, but you'll go right up to that point, right? Infinitesimally away from that, so that profits are still barely positive and the monopolist doesn't leave. Now, in practice, it's really hard to estimate. Like if you get this wrong and you set the price down here, well, now that firm might decide to leave, right? So you probably would want to kind of move this out, set these price ceilings, slowly kind of lower them and kind of evaluate where the profits of the firm is at. So you don't drive that monopolist out completely, creating all of this, having deadweight loss be all the surplus being lost. So that's what this is trying to kind of get at here. You force them to produce this perfectly competitive point, positive profits to lead. So where do we want to get them to? We want to set that price ceiling right at that point where average total cost intersects my demand. There's a lot going on here, but any questions on this? Yeah.
If you asked us to say like, what is the total profits, would there have to be an average total cost line? Like if there was, like the square and the difference between perfectly competitive versus a monopoly, that's where it's just more producer surplus, or would that be considered profit as well if there wasn't an average total cost line?
There wasn't. Okay. I think I know what you're asking. So you could compute producer surplus. It won't exactly, it's not going to be exactly the same thing as profits. Okay? So if we think about when we were doing that before, like we were finding the entire rectangle and the triangle to be producer surplus. But we know profits are represented just by the difference in price average total cost times quantity. So they are two different things. One way to think about producer surplus is so it's not profit, it's the entire. So profits are computing these as economic profits, right? So we're thinking about, we're including opportunity cost there. If you want to think about producer surplus, it's kind of like if we don't factor in those opportunity costs. Okay, this is the entire value of the output that they're putting out there, that they're selling. But the actual profit made from that is lower because we have these opportunity costs that we don't factor.
Okay.
But I understand why that's, I get why it's confusing. That's a good question. Good questions. So, we got this natural monopoly. We kind of talked a little bit about how they regulate it. We've got some other monopoly facts here, or just kind of some more general statements. But right, we can't really set that price to be equal to marginal cost because we drive, right? If we get negative profits, we drive the firm out. So our solution is setting it at where that average total cost curve hits our demand curve, right? Or conversely, if we don't want to set price ceilings, we can also just have the government take over. So what's an industry where we've seen that happen? US mail, it's literally a government-owned monopoly, or at least it was before we even had some competition that now popped up. If you go back like 40, 50 years, essentially what it was. Okay? So they can kind of take ownership and then they just set the quantity price, or they impose these price ceilings and try to kind of target where that average total cost curve hits demand. Okay? So the next thing that we'll talk about is, up to this point, we've looked at single price monopolists, right? So single price monopolists had to set one price, and then in setting that price and the resulting quantity, we kind of figured out, okay, what is marginal revenue based off what marginal revenue is, where's the optimal kind of price and quantity combination. So what if instead these firms could get away with charging different prices? So I don't have to sell this good. I'm the only firm. Like, if somebody doesn't like the price that I'm telling them they have to pay, they're not going to get this good. If I'm the only firm, right? So when I deal with every single person, right, maybe I can tell different people that I only sell to them for different prices, right? I'll talk about some practical applications of how we see this play out. But, well, I'll give you one right away. So one thing that I don't know, I don't have 100% knowledge that this is taking place. There is a lot of circumstantial evidence, but Amazon prices for different users appear differently, right? So why are they doing that, right? Well, if they look at your account and they see that you buy tons of like high-end sneakers, right? Then they know you are going to have a higher willingness to pay, so that you would pay a higher price, right? So they're using all this data that they're gathering on you to then set different prices to different people, because they know, well, this person's never purchased a high-end sneaker, like they're not going to be willing to pay $200 for this. So we've got to kind of set a lower price if we want to incentivize this at all. So essentially what they're doing is trying to identify, we've got this demand curve, which reflects marginal benefit. I then have the monopolist's marginal cost curve up here. What a price discriminating monopolist would do, or what Amazon is attempting to do, is figure out who is this first person, right, on the demand curve. Who is willing to pay the highest price? If from all this data that I've gathered, I can identify that, well, then I know this person would pay exactly whatever their marginal benefit is. So if I could accurately identify all the people that are on this demand curve, well, I can charge them exactly whatever their marginal benefit is, right? So if I do that, my marginal revenue curve essentially becomes my demand curve. Because I'm no longer having to set one price. I can set for every different consumer a different price, right? What price am I going to set? Well, I'm going to be setting the price at wherever I'm at, or wherever that consumer is at, sorry, on the demand curve. So essentially, demand becomes my marginal revenue. So where would the profit maximizing quantity be? So it's always going to be where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue at the C, right? So where would that be here? All the way out here. Right? There's some weird things that happen though. What would this quantity also represent? Not just the quantity, the price discriminating monopolists would choose, but if this market was perfectly competitive, right? Because marginal cost, remember, if we only have one firm, well, that's our supply curve. Right? So when we allow, or if these monopolists are able to price discriminate, awesome, right? We get back to this perfectly competitive quantity. Right? But what's the problem? What is producer surplus here? Well, producer surplus is going to be the price they can charge, the difference between that and the supply curve. Well, what's the price that they're able to charge? It varies. For every quantity, it's wherever we're at on the demand curve. So the difference between the price they're charging and the supply curve, or what their costs are, is the entire value surplus. So what's happened if they can price discriminate? They've now converted all of consumer surplus into producer surplus. When you think about why, well, for the consumers, their surplus is the difference between the price they pay and their marginal benefit. But if every single person is being charged exactly what their marginal benefit is, consumer surplus is zero. Right? Nobody's, no one's getting a positive amount of surplus from buying this good because they're being charged exactly how much they benefit, right? Or their additional benefit. So it looked good originally, but we don't have any dead weight loss here, which I guess is a good thing, right? So if I can charge these different prices and I base this off people's willingness to pay, I'll just charge people kind of whatever their marginal benefit is or wherever they're at in that demand curve. Excuse me. So it actually can increase profits. It increases producer surplus and increases profits for the monopolist. It does get rid of dead weight loss, but it gets rid of consumer surplus entirely as well. So we don't like these either. We kind of think about this relative to a single price monopolist. So the single price monopolist, we can kind of keeping this marginal cost group constant, kind of maybe simplify it. Here's the profit maximizing quantity, and then the resulting price. You can kind of see consumer surplus. We still had some. Either it's dead weight loss in the units we're no longer selling, but at least we had some consumer surplus. When we allow them to price discriminate, well, this entire area becomes producer surplus. We don't have any dead weight loss, but consumers have lost out entirely. Right? Questions on kind of the differences there between the two. Now, are they able to do like perfect price discrimination, even like Amazon that has all this previous purchase data on you? No, it's very difficult to like be able to perfectly price discriminate. But if I can do any form of this, right? So even if I'm only choosing like 5 kind of prices there, and I'm basing that off of different kind of consumer characteristics, if I can get away with identifying what people's marginal benefit is, I'm able to do some version of this, right? Now, we won't look at any models of the in-between because they get more difficult. You can kind of imagine, maybe for these first people, I can identify them off characteristics. So I set this as the price. So, consumer surplus is still here. And then maybe for this group of people, I'm setting this other price. So there is still a little bit of consumer surplus, but you can kind of imagine like it's going to be much lower than what it was under a single price model. So I won't kind of make you look at models where we kind of see that, but we will think about, well, what if we were able to perfectly price discriminate? Right? Being able to understand the extreme, well, then we just know that as companies are able to price discriminate more and more, we're going to get closer and closer to the scenario where consumer surplus is exactly zero. Okay. Questions before we keep moving here? I've got another way of going this. So, if we want to compare this single price monopolist to a perfectly price discriminating monopolist, we see quantity go up, or overall sales will increase. We see that the price in the market for some people is going to be lower than it was before, but for others it will be higher. Most inelastic people are the people who are kind of the most non-responsive to price changes will be the ones who have to pay a higher price. And then we see that overall welfare or total surplus increases, and that dead weight loss goes to zero. However, we said, although that sounds good, we also know that consumer surplus will be zero as well. So another way of looking at this, next to like side by side, looks something like this. So I said that in practice, they may not be able to perfectly price discriminate. You can kind of think about here, we have a single price monopolist. They're only able to charge us one price of 300. Well, instead, for these first 50 consumers, I can get away with charging that price of 400. I can kind of gain additional profit here, right? Before, from these first 50 consumers, I was only getting $10,000. Now, by identifying that they have a higher willingness to pay, I can get away with charging them a price of $400, making an additional $5,000 off. Now, for this next kind of set of consumers, 50 to 100, I'm setting that same price, right? Or I can set the, I charge 300 here, right? Oh, I know. So I had an example where, let's say I can only set two prices. So instead of doing multiple, I'm only setting two. So the first one I set is 400 for these first 50 units. For the next 150 units, right? Maybe I'm only going to choose this lower price of 200. So selling at this price of 200, I can now sell additional units that I wasn't before. So for these consumers, 100 to 150, you can think about I benefited $5,000 from them. But then setting this second price of 200 for these 50 to 150 consumers, the people that were coming in that range, I lose out on $5,000 that I had. You can kind of think about even in this price discriminating model, where I charge $400 and $200, it's two separate prices. Well, I gained 10,000, I lost 5,000, so I would still net make $5,000 more than if I was a single price monopolist. So even if you could only do like two prices, you can see that there still would be gains to being able to price discriminate. Now, once again, it's kind of hard to visualize how we do this in practice, but the idea conceptually and intuitively what you would be doing, if you could take these 150, these 200 consumers and rank them by how much each one valued this good, and then charge the first 50 this higher price of 400, the next 100 people who valued it this lower price of 200, you could benefit as opposed to just selling it at $300 to everyone. Yeah.
Why are those like white triangles in the middle?
So what would those white triangles represent?
Is that the one?
Not deadweight loss. So think about deadweight loss is just the surplus loss here from not selling at that perfectly competitive quantity. So this area would be deadweight loss. These three triangles actually represent, well, these people are only paying $200. The difference between that and the demand curve would actually represent consumer surplus. Okay? In fact, I had that up there, but really it's this was just to kind of compare it to before. So this would represent a consumer surplus to the people who value it from 50 to 150th. This would represent consumer surplus to the people who value it from 0 to 50. So you can kind of see here, the consumers who value it higher have much less surplus than the consumers who value it lower, because the ones that are higher, monopolists, they can get away with charging them a higher price. Good question. Any other questions on this? So even though I only set two prices, you can kind of see these things play out. This is just a different visualization. You think about this before, if we have a single price monopolist, marginal cost is the marginal revenue here. Here's that profit maximizing price. So that kind of area B represents single price monopolist surplus, right? Or profit. If we then have a perfectly price discriminating monopolist, right? The entire demand curve becomes the price they can charge or their marginal revenue. So there, producer surplus would be all the entire area, right? A plus B plus C. If we had a perfectly competitive market, here's the here would be the equilibrium quantity, the equilibrium price would be 100. The difference between price and demand, the entire area would actually be consumer surplus. Right? So you can kind of see as we move, right, from perfectly competitive single price to perfect price discrimination, producer surplus is increasing, consumer surplus is decreasing. This simplifies it a little bit, kind of keeping marginal cost constant, but like I said, there's some pretty real world applications of like drugs, generic drugs, and some other industries that we can kind of see that constant marginal cost. So. Questions on anything there? So the main idea there is that as we move from a perfectly competitive to single price to a perfect price stream monopolist, we're just seeing consumer surplus go down more and more, and producer surplus increasing. So what does this look like in the real world? I kind of already mentioned this, but you know, it's not like you go up to someone and tell them like exactly what you would pay for the good, right? Like even if you go to a store and you might pay $50 for something and the price tag's 20, well, you're not going to go to the front like, hey, I know that you got this price of $20, but I actually give you 50 for it, right? That's not what's going to happen. What we see is firms try to use traits like age, a lot of demographic information, kind of what region of the country you're from, to get an idea that, you know, people who live in the Midwest are more likely to buy or pay higher prices for winter jackets than people who live in Florida, right? Or people who are over 70 are more likely to, I don't know, pay for a checkbook as opposed to someone who's not, right? So they use these different characteristics to kind of get an idea of, in general, on average, these groups will be willing to pay higher or lower prices. Now, I also mentioned, I don't think I have it here in the slides, but, you know, with Amazon now, this is, you know, and on all these other companies that just collect this consumer purchase data and have like, you're just a number to them, and they've stored all these purchases that you ever made with them, they might be able to kind of start showing you different prices. I think another company is, like I said, I don't know this for sure because I don't know someone that works at the company doing this, but based off of what I've seen, you ever want to buy like sports stuff, like apparel or all these different things, like different sporting things. There's like Fanatics, a couple other companies, and all their websites look the same. I think they're all owned by the same person, but they're continually always having sales, right? So they show you a price, but it's never the price. They're always having a sale price. And I'm pretty sure what they're doing, because I get targeted emails about specific teams of, you know, that I might buy. I'm pretty sure they show different consumers different prices based off of what they purchased on the site before, right? So that sale reduction is dependent on what your previous history was. And that, you know, makes sense from a company standpoint, because all they're doing is identifying who would be willing to pay more for that product.
As someone who worked there, you're correct.
Yeah. So like I said, I see these things and I don't know for sure because I don't contact the company, but then this is definitely what they're trying to do. And it didn't used to be like, it's kind of funny. Even if you go back, like when I was in college and they were teaching perfect price discrimination, it was kind of like just this, basing it off of traits, right? We didn't have as much data on individual consumers' purchase history. And so it was kind of like this, well, in theory, we could see something like this. And now with the internet and their ability to track you, we see this happening a lot, right? You see companies doing this a lot online. But just to kind of give some easier to think about examples, movie tickets, people know, the movies know they offer senior discounts or they offer discounts to the students. Why? Well, maybe because they know they're actual people who might be able to attend a movie in the afternoon, right? So matinee prices are lower, not because they're in the middle of the day, but because the types of people who could go to a movie during the day are on fixed incomes, right? So they're not willing to have the ability or willingness to pay a higher price, right? Or you can kind of think about, sometimes they have like discount coupons. So this is another thing that companies try to do to change the price to you. They'll send you targeted ads, right? So I know Meyer does this, like they'll send you like all these coupons based off of what you buy, right? They're lowering the price on certain products to get you to buy higher quantities, right? So it's not always that you want to get away with charging a higher price, because depending on where you're at on that individual demand curve, charging a lower price might actually, it's going to eat into your cost a little bit, but if they buy more of that good, well, the quantity increase makes up for it, right? So we see a lot of companies kind of sending these targeted ads. In fact, got a story for that, but I'll hold off on that. Another really good one, kind of need-based financial aid, right? We know that people want to buy a college education, but not everybody has the same ability to pay for that, right? And so we're offering kind of essentially different prices for education with need-based financial aid. And then quantity discounts. I won't go into this too much. This is a little bit outside the scope of this class. But you can kind of imagine, even for if you could identify an individual, you might say, okay, for the first unit you buy, we'll charge you 5, but if you buy a second, that second one will only cost you 4. We see this all the time. Buy one, get one 50% off. Because we know what's true about that demand curve. I'm willing to pay more for the first unit than I am for the second, right? So in order to convince you to buy that second unit, I know that I can't charge the same price as before, buy one, get one 50% off, right? Lowering the price of that second unit. So we see this play out a lot as well. I don't know, this isn't overly interesting. There's a bunch of acts, like we try to break up monopolies. I think at this point we can kind of see they're not a good thing for consumers. So the government has stepped in several instances. I don't know, to me, this is not overly important that you understand these acts inside and out, but just mentioning that they exist. I also talked about kind of natural monopoly price setting, where we want to set that price exactly at that average total cost, so it hits the demand curve. That's an example. We got the post office taken over by the government as opposed to the government regulation on these industries. They also could technically do nothing, right? So that's kind of, I think that's what I wanted to say on that. I'm gonna go through that quick. It's not overly important, right? To understanding how these work. Okay. So in terms of sending targeted ads, so let me think about if I want to do this today or not. So we kind of already went through this, and we'll start next class. So I'll pick up on this next class. We'll kind of pick up here, but I do want to kind of mention one thing about those targeted ads. So I read this. There's this article, this story about Target, and they sent out some targeted ads to different families. And his father kind of emailed, I don't know, someone high up at Target and was like complaining and like, why are you, why'd you send me this mailer that says congratulations, you're pregnant. My wife is, 55. This makes no sense. And they go, well, someone in your household is, right? And, he's thinking about it. Why in the world are you sending us ads for like diapers and like baby products? Well, a couple months later, he actually returns another email and says, my 16-year-old daughter was pregnant. So what Target did was just based off of her purchases, right? That was on the family credit card account. They can identify the products that people who are in early stages of pregnancy might be more likely to buy, not even if they consciously know that they're pregnant or not. So it could be based off of like food choices. It could be based off of a variety of different things. They actually identified before the father even knew that his daughter was pregnant. So kind of interesting, but also scary how much data companies have on us, right? Since everybody is pretty engaged here today, on your way out, just make sure you respond to anything. Kind of make sure you get, recorded for being here.
Oh,
We don't have any actual question, but I just want to kind of give you the full 10 out of 10 for being here today. I also think typically we're seeing that a lot of this work done on the board, being here in person is going to be very beneficial for you at that next exam. Okay. All right. I'll see you guys on Friday. Excuse me.
right.